Chinese have not given any positive response to our asks, which I have just outlined for you today. And I will say this, we have the economic advantage right now. Part of the reason the yuan is falling is because people are disinvesting in China. They've lost confidence. Now, it's not a free market, but they're trying to get out. We are in a boom, and they know it. We are in a position to back up our actions. I'm not sure they can. We will see.
Intransigent is what Larry Kudlow is saying about the Chinese. And listen, this moved markets. So our crack countdown producers moved heaven and earth to get the one tape of that National Economic Council director event at the Detroit Economic Club yesterday, because what Larry Kudlow said moved the markets. They were already down, but as he roasted China and its refusal, he says, outright refusal to come to the trade table, those explosive comments sent the Dow to its lowest of the session, 470 points to the downside. America's trade war from China is far from over. It is anyone's guess how it's going to play out, something the markets have signaled in their volatility. Overnight, China released numbers showing its slowest economic growth in nearly a decade. GDP for the third quarter of 6.5%. Listen, we'd kill for that, but China's been much higher. So it's all in perspective here. The head of China's central bank and top regulators are now promising to stop the collapse of the Chinese stock market and to intervene and loosen up all kinds of financial restrictions on banks so that people start lending. China's benchmark stock indices, the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen, already down more than 30% since January. Our next guest has advised the last two presidents, yes, that includes Donald Trump, on trade policy and negotiations. Fred Bergsten is a member of the President's Advisory Committee for Trade and Policy Negotiations and, since 2010, Peterson Institute Senior Fellow and Director Emeritus. Welcome. Fred, we don't know if Donald Trump's hardline approach to trade with China will yield long-term results. But at the moment, how do you see it?
President Trump has certainly gotten the Chinese attention, but I think he's going about it the wrong way. He has identified real problems. Chinese trade and investment policies do distort the world economy. They do lead to imbalances. They do provide an unlevel playing field. And there's a pretty wide domestic consensus within the U.S. and an international consensus, going way beyond President Trump, that they have to be dealt with. But the issue is how. Applying unilateral pressure through tariffs and threats, like President Trump has done, is calculated to backfire. The Chinese have their own domestic politics, their own domestic pressures, and history shows they will not capitulate to U.S. bilateral pressure. By contrast, if we have the wit to mobilize our traditional allies, the Europeans, Japan, other Asians, and China is internationally isolated, that is something they do not want and demonstrably will respond to. So there are several exercises underway with Europe, with Japan, in the World Trade Organization, in the new Trans-Pacific Partnership, that provide frameworks within which I think China will, over time, change its ways, which is necessary to head off the trade wars, which otherwise will be very costly, not just to China, but to our own economy big time.
Fred, if this were 10 years ago, I might agree with you that it would backfire, because China was a closed empire. They are open now, and we can start to see the fissures and the green stick fractures, because when they start making moves such as cutting financial regulation, they're easing corporate financial regulations so that they don't require as much from banks and things like that. They're putting pillows and padding down to cushion the blow. If the president squeezes tighter and tighter, to say that it would backfire, I think, might not exactly be true. I think that they, at some point, will be forced to come to the table.
No, with all due respect, you're wrong. 10 years ago, China was much more dependent on foreign markets than they are now. Over that period, they have shifted their economic model to rely more on domestic demand, domestic growth, the services sector, not nearly as reliant on exports in the world market as they were. 10 years ago, they were manipulating their currency big time to drive their trade surplus way up because that was the driver of their growth. Now their trade surplus has almost disappeared with the world, not with us. Their global trade surplus has almost disappeared. And so they're relying on their domestic economy. Sure, they still have a big interest in the world economy. They don't want to see it collapse. They, too, want to avoid the trade war. I say he's got their attention. They have a big motivation to end the trade war, too. But by no means is their economy dependent on avoiding further conflict with the United States. Their growth rate that came out today, you mentioned 6.5%. Yes, it's down from what they had. But they weren't going to keep growing 10% for another 40 years like they did for the last 40 years. 6.5%, as you said, is something we'd kill for. It's double our current rate. It's triple our underlying rate. They're likely to continue that for another 10 or 20 years. I don't think they're about to cry uncle and capitulate to the United States.
All right, but one last question, Fred. You're an advisor to President Trump. Does he listen to you? I mean, you're saying the exact opposite of what he is currently doing. When you say going about it the wrong way, what is the right way?
Well, I'm not alone. There's a tremendous backlash against the president's trade policies within his own party, within the Congress, within the agricultural sector, within the business community. It's a hotly debated topic, as you know. So by no means am I alone. What I'm suggesting is that instead of ratcheting up the bilateral pressure and forcing the Chinese to lose face, which is unthinkable for them if they were to capitulate, what we should do is work with our allies, as is increasingly the case, to try to develop an international consensus that isolates China and motivates them to stop cheating, which they need to do, to change the international rules, to sanction them, which I think they're willing to do.
Okay.
I'm very encouraged by the fact that President Trump has solved, or at least called a truce, in his other trade wars. Okay. He settled with NAFTA. He settled with Korea. He's got negotiations going with the Europeans and Japan. He went to the Congress this week to ask for authority to negotiate new deals with Europe. So he has settled the trade wars with the others. The only one remaining is China. That is the important one. Okay. If he'll now work with the other countries vis-a-vis China, then I think that's the way to go, and I think it can succeed.